Cash Flow Diary Podcast, episode 509.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cash Flow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cash Flow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cash Flow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because at the end of the day, I've said it before, you will never be the same. Like the version of you that's listening to this right now is not the same version of you that's going to be required in order to make your business grow. That means one of the most constant things that are in the world, the planet, your business, you, is change. And we all know this. And yet at the same time, many of our businesses don't change the way that we need to. We don't change the way that we need to. And sometimes we can get, stuck. And we don't want that. We want to be change agents as well as be open to receiving the changes that happen. And in fact, if you have been paying attention, especially in the real estate world, you know, like I know, that change is rampant because of technology. It has totally crashed the idea of what you and I think of as traditional real estate, whether it's the sourcing of the tenant and how we actually run the properties. What really matters at the end of the day is that you and we stay on top of it. And I have with me someone who will be able to, help us do that. In fact, he kind of, if you could say, has written many books on this topic in terms of innovation and change. And his newest book is Leading Transformation, How to Take Charge of Your Company's Future, which is actually one of those important vision things that we all need to make sure that we take the time to do. Of course, I'm talking about Nathan Furr. He's a professor over at INSEAD. Now, if you are listening to me in the United States, I said INSEAD, and you said, what? I know. We're going to talk about what INSEAD is, and you will be amazed to hear what happens outside of the U.S. borders, but more importantly, how it is affecting the transformation and changes that are occurring in business and technology and abroad. With that being said, here's what I'm going to say to you. Nathan is a professor. That by definition means you and I are about to learn something truly awesome. But this is going to be one of those times, you know that professor that you love, the one that you like, that you really want to listen to? Well, that's Nathan. So today, you and we're going to go back to school, but also leave more educated as we listen to Nathan Furr. Nathan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Welcome to class.
That's what it's going to feel like. I'm guessing because you know so much, but you have passion for what you do because you've written so many books about it. And yet at the same time, you still have more to say. I find that awesome, to be honest.
No, yeah, I love it. I love what you're doing. And I love, the work and dreams that your audience members are trying to pursue. And my hope is just that I help them along that journey.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about, because not every instructor or teacher necessarily subscribes to helping the entrepreneur. But, when you're out there and that's like your thing, you kind of get my attention, and I'm pretty excited about that. Now, this being your first time here, I have to ask you the same question I tend to ask everybody their first time here. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, etc. And I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. For example, as an entrepreneur, occasionally I can envision myself running around town using our products and services and saving our customers one sale at a time. And yes, I'm probably wearing a cape at that moment. Now, with that being said, also like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. Take Spider-Man, for example. There was a time where he was just a kid going to school, doing his thing. Then one day he gets bit by a spider and suddenly discovers, oh my goodness, I have superhuman abilities, and he gets to choose whether to use them for good or for evil. So, my question to you is as follows. Before, say your books, Nail It, Then Scale It, the Innovator's Method, the new one, Leading Transformation, before being a professor at INSEAD, before being a recognized expert in technology strategy, digital transformation, and disruptive innovation, which actually sounds like the same word twice. But before all of those things, what we want to know is, who is Nathan Furr?
Yeah, what's my origin story? I like that. That's very cool. Gosh, when you frame it that way, it's an interesting question because, Jay, at the core of it, I'm somebody who really cares about the dreams that people have and people getting the chance to pursue that. I mean, I want to believe in a world of opportunity where the barriers to do what you want to do have come down, and your chance to take advantage of that is greater than it's ever been. And so if I go back to my origin story, I can kind of trace that. I started my career in industry. I worked, for some big companies. I tried my hand at a startup, learned through the school of hard knocks some things, what not to do. Really, but I got so interested in this question of how does innovation really happen? And so I went back to Stanford to do my PhD, and I did it in the Stanford Technology Ventures program, which was this little tiny group at Stanford that was just at the nexus of innovators and investors and idea makers in Silicon Valley. It was just such a rich place to be. And while I was there, I really stumbled upon what for me is a fundamental dilemma. And all of my books, all of my writing are all wrestling with this fundamental question. And that is, you mentioned it at the beginning. You said we see that the world is changing and it's changing fast. And we feel like we're living in this environment of uncertainty and change. And how do we manage that? And my big concern for people is that many of the traditional management tools that are taught in business schools and that we have were actually designed in a different era. They were designed during the Industrial Revolution to answer the question, how do we coordinate and optimize big organizations? They were not really designed to address an environment of radical uncertainty. And so my quest became, what are the tools for an environment of hyper change and a very dynamic environment? What are the tools? What are the frameworks? What are the theories? Maybe we already have them. Maybe we don't. What are the new ones that we need? And so, for example, when I was at Stanford, I became part of the lean startup movement. I was one of the early guys in that movement. I knew Steve Blank and Eric Ries, and Nail It, Then Scale It was a book written to make those lean startup ideas accessible to entrepreneurs. And then I realized after I finished that lean startup had a lot in common with this other group that I started to get involved with at Stanford called the Design School. And they were teaching design thinking, and it had a lot in common with agile methodologies. And so as I started to look around the world, I started to see all these new innovation frameworks. And I began to ask the question, well, what do those have in common? What could they teach us about the innovation process? And how do we make those tools more accessible to established companies? And that became the book, The Innovator's Method. And I continued my quest, but I kept asking underneath it, coming back to what are the tools we need for a world of uncertainty? And one of the big questions I felt was still unresolved was how do we make a long leap? We all get stuck in our everyday lives. We get in our habits, we get in our routines, we're just doing the same thing. And it's hard to really see beyond that fence of our daily life what else is possible. You occasionally have the experience where you'll talk to somebody, maybe somebody's listening to your podcast and they have this aha moment of like, oh my gosh, I could do things totally differently. I was wondering, how do we access those moments and then start to take action. And that's really what led to this third book, Leading Transformation, through a collision of co-authors, including, we've got some comics and graphic novels in there, mixed in there too. But that's really what motivated it. And maybe let me just say one more word about this theme of uncertainty that runs throughout my work. I said we need new tools and frameworks for a world of uncertainty, but what I want to highlight is what's the driving force there? The driving force is technology. Technology has lowered the barriers for people to create, to interact, and participate, and even magnified the impact of that participation. And so that means that you're out there in the business environment, the environment feels much more uncertain because there's more entrepreneurs entering, there's more inventions, there's just more dynamism than before. But the uncertainty side of that, in my view, is only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin that we have to be sure we acknowledge is possibility. That technology has lowered all those barriers, and there's more possibilities for all of us than ever before. It's easier to create software. It's easier to create hardware. It's easier to say and share your message than it ever was before. And there's more communities to support what you have to say and what you have to do. And so on the one hand, you hear me talking about what's the theory to manage uncertainty. I also care even more, what's the theory to take advantage of a world of possibility?
You know, what's interesting is I'm listening to you, I'm just going, what he's saying is, it's kind of how you and I are even talking right now.
Oh, yeah, tell me.
It's like the barriers have come down, and that's a great thing. But for those entrepreneurs wondering, like, how do I make my business work? Part of the challenge is, well, the barriers have come down. So now everyone is there. I have to ask, though, because you said something that I need to understand more. You said it was radical uncertainty and hyper change. I'm curious, was not uncertainty and change always present, and was it not always radical and hyper? I mean, is it speeding up? Is that what you're trying to say, or help me understand a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me take a step back in my story and paint a picture for you. Before the Industrial Revolution, there was no such topic as management. There were no business schools. There were no courses you could take on management or being an entrepreneur. But every business was a small business of about 30 people or less. And what happened is in about the 1700s, the technology changes that landscape from a world of small businesses to a world of large businesses. So now you have these massive giants producing textiles and automobiles and operating railway lines. And that introduced a fundamentally new problem that needed to be dealt with. And that is, how do I coordinate these huge organizations? How do I make the trains run on time? How do I hire people? And business schools were created to solve that problem. And in fact, by the way, the first business school was founded in 1881. It was Wharton. The first MBA program was created in 1908. It was at Harvard. And yet, think the Industrial Revolution starts in the 1700s. It takes us until kind of the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s to like really start to create this discipline of management. And the question management tries to solve, again, is how do I coordinate? How do I optimize? How do I execute? You could not take a course in entrepreneurship in a business school until, if you were lucky, in the right place, about the 1970s. Then it starts to really take off in the 1980s and 1990s. And what's happened is that, as I mentioned, technology, as it's lowered the barriers so that it's easier to create software, it's easier to create hardware. There's now more new companies, more new inventions, more people participating in the invention, creation, and commercialization process than ever before. So that now that's what creates the environment of dynamism. And I'll just give you a simple example. I remember when I did my PhD at Stanford, going over to Google in some of the earlier days, and they would very proudly show off one of the sources of their one of their big things, and it was a server rack. And what they showed is that they had found a way to pack more computing power per square foot into this server rack and therefore save on costs relative to the competitors. But the thing about that server rack is for the founders of Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, to found Google, they had to go out and raise tens of millions of dollars of venture capital to buy the computers to then run their business. If they wanted to try that business today, they could, with a credit card, and in a short period of time, go to Amazon Web Services and just start it right now. That's what I mean by the barriers are lower. Or my friends who are in the hardware world, they're just like, this is the golden age for hardware entrepreneurs. There's more components, there's more source code, there's more everything available to you than there was in the past. And it's not just, the entrepreneurs. I mean, by some estimates, there's like 50 million new businesses formed globally every year. It's not just the entrepreneurs, but it's also invention. I mean, globally, and we have a long ways to go here, but there's more people, men and women, participating in the invention process, whether that's just that they get to go to university and they get to go work in a lab, or it's just you and me dreaming up ideas. So that to me is where the dynamism. And so what's happened is the question has begun to shift from, over the past few decades, it's begun to shift from how do I coordinate and optimize and execute on the capture of value. It's shifted to becoming, how do I create value? How do I create new value? How do you discover new sources of value? What are the tools and processes and techniques for that? And that, by the way, is the big quest that we're on, and that I'm on personally, and that many of my colleagues in the business school are on. And that's where I think why you see, for example, the emergence of like lean startup and design thinking and agile methodologies. And I could go on and on. All of those to me are different answers to the question of, well, how do we manage the uncertainty of innovation? And my prediction is we'll have more and more theories, more frameworks. You hear about big companies are starting to adopt, holacracy or agile as an organizational structure. They're just wrestling with, gosh, how do we organize in a world that's more dynamic? That maybe the same hierarchical structure doesn't work anymore. What are the new structures that we need?
Well, you actually, it's funny you say that, because there's two things going through my head. I see, at least on my end, helping people, start their businesses, and that's kind of what we do. And I see there seems to be this shift possibly back away from the whole large business concept, back to the 30 people or less that you were talking about. Because we can do so much more, just from a phone or a tablet, and we have access to so many things. I mean, 2 APIs, one idea, 2 APIs later, and a credit card, and you're done.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to know if that was that if you were seeing companies in general go be smaller and more efficient and still be able to compete with the big boys, so to speak. Hey guys, thanks for listening as always, and I'm glad that you continue to support with each and every download and subscription and share. One of the things that I want to ask you, though, is where are you listening to me from right now? I know some of you, maybe you're on a treadmill, maybe you're washing dishes, maybe you're walking that dog, and some of you are actually in a vehicle driving right now. One of the fun things that you can do, get some of your time back, is begin to living a car-free existence. But even then, it can be a little complicated. So one of the things that I want you to do is I want you to go over to Zipcar. Go to joinzipcar.com/cashflow diary. It's a way that I am able to still go get a car just for a few hours, very, very simply, so that if I have a lot of errands to run and sheets to drop off and running to the short-term rentals, or if I just want to go for a long trip up to LA and back, etc., I can rent a car for a very, very short period of time. And the cool part is I don't even have to pay for any gas. Again, go to joinzipcar.com/cashflow diary.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like two dynamics at once. So if you talk to like the economists, they see some consolidation around like the mega platforms like Amazon and Google and so forth. Yeah. Like those have grown really big. On the other hand, we see like massive kind of growth in small businesses and the opportunities around mass customization. I mean,
Yeah.
in the past, when you had, say, a big automobile manufacturer, the advantage of that organizational structure is it was hard to mobilize the capital to produce those products.
Right.
And so a big organization was a good shell for that. And what we're seeing is that there's if you can lower those barriers to create, you allow so many more ideas to enter the market. And so even big companies now, when I work with executives at INSEAD, for example, they're asking, how do I start working with startups more? Because I can't do it all myself. The world's
Right.
changing too fast. And so I think one thing, if we kind of got really philosophical, one thing that software does do is it makes the world more modular. And when you make the world more modular, it's easier to have more pieces playing with each other in different ways. So that's another driver. In addition to lowering the barriers so more people can participate, the world's a little more modular than it was. It's easier, as you said, an API, suddenly we can work together.
I just had a crazy thought. How, because you can like go to these companies and get your t-shirts, print on demand, hey, I want this shirt with this graphic, and boom, it's to me delivered by Amazon, probably that same day in some cases, who knows, because it's insanely fast. I was like, what if we ever end up in a situation to where we have like cars that are quote unquote made on demand, where you're like, I want this, that, and the other, and you can just really customize. I mean, because you're taking a really, really big industry with this new concept at the same time. And just that thought process hit my head going, wow, that would be crazy. But yet it feels like that's where we're headed.
Yeah. It's not so crazy, because actually one of the things that sometimes I wrote a case about Tesla. So I interviewed Elon Musk and his whole team. That those interviews and stuff are in my work. But one of the things that sometimes people have a hard time recognizing from the outside, maybe easier in California because there's more of them, but it's a different architecture. Like, and a Tesla is like mostly software. And once you start to introduce that kind of world, you start to open up possibilities for the future. So my guess is, even if you go to a consumer electronics show, there's more automobile startups than ever before, because these platforms, there's so many. I mean, you looked in the auto industry like 5-10 years ago, like there would be like, extremely little innovation. Now, like you go to consumer electronics show, I think the year or two ago, I think there was more automobile related startups than almost any other category, because those platforms, those architectures are opening up, and there's, again, more people participating. So you're probably predicting the future here.
That would be pretty interesting if that was the case. Now, you mentioned 1881 Wharton, 1908 MBA at Harvard. And I know for myself, I didn't know before this conversation and had never heard of INSEAD. Where did they fit in?
Yeah, so it's funny. You can hear from so I'm based in France. You could probably guess that from my thick French accent. But no, I'm an American, and I did my PhD at Stanford. But INSEAD was founded in Europe originally to be the Harvard of Europe, and so it was founded by a former Harvard professor, Harvard Business School professor, saying, "Hey, the rest of the world doesn't have the same access that the United States does," and INSEAD has actually expanded to be the #1 international business school. So, although, I mean, I'm like you, before I didn't know that much about INSEAD. Once you get outside of the United States, it's extremely well known. We have campuses in France, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, and next year we'll have a campus in San Francisco. And our real focus is, I guess, point of differentiation is trying to see the world as the stage. And what do we see differently if we kind of look at that world? So it's cool to talk about Silicon Valley, but what happens when you take into account, say, Shenzhen and China, and they're like the Silicon Valley of hardware? What do you see there? And so that's really the point of differentiation. But it's full of fabulous colleagues like you'd have at any top university in the United States, and it's been a really fun place to be. My heart's I always love the U.S. and my heart's there, but it's fun to be at INSEAD as well.
Totally understood. I mean, I think as a business owner, we have no choice, but especially in today's economy, to consider things outside our own natural borders, whether that's U.S., whether it's those of you listening to us in Europe, Australia. It doesn't really matter. The point is we're all in this one big spinning globe, and you've got to figure out a way to deliver efficient, effective service or product to people wherever they are. Speaking of which, because we have, access to so many things, because things are easier for the entrepreneur to wake up today and have a business tomorrow, how on earth does a small business owner even come close to staying on top of or integrating all of this change into their business? I mean, half the time getting the bookkeeping done is a challenge.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I hear you. And, because of my own experience running a startup, and then my younger brother he's an entrepreneur right now. And I'm always telling him, you've got to outsource your bookkeeping. So you focus on important things.
Exactly.
So I hear you. Well, it's kind of a mix of things. So, let me say, in terms of fundamentals, right? It's funny. I just want to build on your point about taking the world into account. The first work I did on innovation asked the question, where do really good ideas come from? And
Wow.
This is work that's summarized in the Innovator's method and in another book called The Innovator's DNA. And we found that these really kind of radical innovators engaged in 5 behaviors. I mean, of course, many other behaviors, but the top 5 behaviors. The number one behavior was what we call dissociating, which is simply a mental activity of putting different things together. So there are very, very, very few ideas that are like truly radically new. Most innovation is about taking an idea from one context, one place, and using it in another. So one of the benefits of kind of paying attention to what's going on in the broader world is there's a lot of innovation that gets stuck in one geography or one place or one industry, one activity that can be borrowed somewhere else, and then it becomes kind of a big idea somewhere else. So that one behavior of association, I'd encourage you to keep your eyes open. And since we're talking about it, the other 4 behaviors we talked about were also questioning, being willing to challenge the status quo, observing, noticing the world around you to see problems that can be fixed, experimenting, being willing to try and test new things, follow your curiosity. And then lastly, networking, but not networking like handing out business cards, but networking for ideas. So talking to other people, keeping your eyes open for those connections. So those 5 behaviors, associating, questioning, observing, experimenting, and networking, were like at the core of idea generation. And then once you have an idea, what do you do with that idea? And this was the heart of the books, Nail It, Then Scale It, and The Innovator's Method. And I'd say, on the one hand, yeah, you could try to stay on top of everything and pay attention to all these technology trends. But I'm just finishing a draft of an article for Harvard Business Review about digital transformation. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of framing it as like these 5 myths. And one of the myths is that digital transformation is about technology. And you'd be like, wait a minute, how does that go together?
How is it not?
How is it not about technology? And it's not because, and this is why it's not, because it's about the customer. If it's not about a customer need, a customer problem, it doesn't matter what you dream up. It doesn't matter how fancy and entrepreneurs and engineers and corporates, they get in this trap all the time, get a big idea, or about some fancy technology or something, but none of that really matters unless you're really deeply solving a customer need. And so when I talk about the innovation process, it always goes back to, how do I understand the customer's job to be done, their underlying need for which they've hired this solution or service or product, and finding ways to do that better is the essence of, good business, whether you're an entrepreneur or corporate. And so even when it comes down to something as fancy pants as digital transformation, which I teach, I don't care about, yes, artificial intelligence is exciting and blockchain is, cool, and virtual reality, very fun, but they're only useful to the end that you solve a customer problem better. And so to me, as an entrepreneur, like just always getting to the heart of that. I mean, I remember, I kind of, you heard me hint at the fact that I had a startup that failed. And we did this women's clothing line. And I used to, people say, oh, who's your target customer? And I say like, oh, women ages X to Y who care about this. And it was all made up. Like that failed because, it didn't fail, it did okay. But it didn't do stellar because we hadn't really gotten deep to understand what customer need we were solving. And as we started to home in on that, then it started to really become distinctive. Then we had a distinctive message. So I don't want to talk your ear off, Jay, but that's the kind of principles that I talk about in the Innovators method, and nail it, then scale it. That's kind of what the heart of that was about. And then this most recent book was almost taking a step back from that, which is how do I even wrap my head around what is possible for me or my business and start to take action on that. So it's a little more.
Well, that's exactly where I what's going through my head is because today while it may not be something I'm concerned about today, I'm thinking about AR, VR, AR, voice. Yeah. And then you mentioned blockchain, and I was like, yeah, all of these things are coming, and they're going to make a massive difference. I have no clue how, but I just know I need to be ready for some sort of change. And it feels like they're all going to come at the same time, and I'm just going to wake up and be like, what happened? And so how does one lead or a team or an organization? I was going to say smoothly through this, but I don't think there's any smooth through all, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things that are coming our way. They're all coming, and they all feel like they're coming right now. Because in the real estate world, VR has a great application. So does AR, and voice is going to help from the smart home aspect for sure. And it's already done these things. I have no idea how AI and blockchain are going. Well, I see blockchain is going to just revolutionize title and our transaction process. All of these things are coming, right now, and it's crazy and it feels overwhelming. How does an entrepreneur future-proof and lead through we're leading through transformation? How does that happen?
So I want to answer your question two ways. The second part, I want to share some ideas from the book, but the first part, I want to say, balance that awareness to what is possible with, just to calm down the nerves of everybody a little bit with,
did you hear the anxiety in my voice? I'm sorry.
People get really anxious, right? And there's no doubt these things will come, but it's a question of when. And the answer to when is always, when does it solve a customer need? So I'm going to put on a little different hat for you than the leading transformation hat. I'm going to put on my technology strategy hats, because I teach MBAs about technology and how it changes the world. And I would say, look for the Trojan horse. And you're like, what do you mean by that? Let me tell you a fun story. Back kind of around the turn of this, the start of the 2000s, Sony found themselves in a kind of difficult position. Everybody at that time was thinking that household robotics was like the next big frontier, but Sony was way behind. Honda had already spent 10, 15 years building household robots. They'd spent $100 million. They had that walking robot you've seen, the Asimo. Their competitors, NEC and Omron and others, had a lot of money in big robotics programs. They were way ahead of Sony. And Sony's like, wow, how do we even catch up, in this big race? And what you see come out of Sony is a little puzzling at first. They launch a little robotic dog called the Aibo.
I remember that.
Aibo, you remember that? Okay, it didn't work that well. It didn't do that much. Like you'd give it a voice command, bark, and it would do nothing. and so your first reaction to that is like, what in the world were they
Yeah.
thinking? Like Honda's already got a walking robot that does tasks, and they're making a toy dog. But the brilliance of it, and it was a brilliant move, is that it allowed them to start learning by doing. It allowed them to find a customer segment who would pay for this thing today, and they could start developing their capabilities by actually doing it, by manufacturing it, by trying and learning. And so they ultimately sold, hundreds of thousands of these little Aibo robots. They actually caught up and surpassed Honda's capabilities. And when I look back at that story, I'm like, what they found is they found a Trojan horse. They found a customer need where they could start learning about these technologies today. Somebody who would pay them today to use these things. And so I feel like as we throw out all these kind of big, fancy fourth industrial revolution technology names, that we got to remember where that will take off is where it's solving a real need today. And that's where you want to be playing and exploring and learning and watching for that Trojan horse, that's where it's taking off. Because you know what? Honda hasn't sold, I mean, I don't know how many, if they've sold any of the Asimos. They cost, well over $100,000. They cost a couple, I think, in the millions. But they're not selling those Asimo robots, whereas Sony is. And then you know what happened? They cut it. They cut the program, and they cut it because I think building those gave them the insight that we're not ready yet. The AI isn't ready. The robotics isn't ready, but they did relaunch it this year.
Yeah,
so
I was going to say, isn't there a new?
out.
Yeah, I was like, I thought there was.
Yeah,
a new one.
So they're back and they're playing that game. So I guess I would say, for your audience, especially if you think about real estate, I would just be saying, hey, how do the world? These technologies look really scary from the outside, but you get on the inside, it's a lot less scary than it looks. Look for where it really would add value to your customers today, and just play along with the people. Just get involved. You don't have to be master and owner of everything. Partner with people, go to events, learn from them. That's how you stay on top of it. So that's like my first kind of view of those kind of crazy technologies. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
No. What I was going to, well, no, and I want to hear that. It's just that because when you say that, the thing that, again, just my cursory level overview, I've spent the most time understanding the impacts of the blockchain, etc. And that's what I'm mostly concerned about, is that transformation, what the blockchain has available specifically for real estate, is speed that which the real estate market has never seen. I mean, we historically are we move like molasses. It takes forever to transact title and change things. I mean, and being able to move at the same speed as, say, stocks and equities and bonds is literally what's coming to the future. And I think that one little, oh my God, watching how fast transactions and pricing can happen is, I don't know what that looks like, but it's going to look like something. And we definitely don't have the data, the speed. We don't have the databases for it in order to be able to make the decisions. We're used to taking our time with those things. And those are the things that I keep thinking about, is it's not going to be like that. It's just not.
So that's what you've just identified for me. Sounds like the beachhead or the Trojan horse. That's the real spot where these technologies could really, hit real estate. And what I would say is, if you're a big real estate player, then maybe you want to be dabbling your fingers in there. But my guess is, for a lot of your audience, it's more about who do I play with? Who out there is developing these kind of solutions that I could start learning from, and just not being afraid of it. Seriously, just going to a conference or going to seeing who's developing solutions out there. That is it ready for you to start playing around with? And if so, then great. If it's not ready, then kind of keeping your eyes out and watching like you are. It sounds like the right approach. Just as long as you kind of test and learn as you go, I think that's the best approach. You don't want to ignore it, and you don't want to, on the other hand, bet the farm today, because it can take some time for these technologies to emerge.
I told people at the beginning of this episode, I said, we're going back to school, and you were one of those instructors, and you're engaging in such a way that you make me want to go to school, man. Stop it. I love it. Oh, man. And for those that have listened this far, and who want to pick up more of Nathan and understand more about what you've got going on over there at INSEAD and technology and how they can better prepare their business, what's going to be the best way for them to follow up with you, find out more what you got going on, maybe even grab a copy of the book?
Yeah. So one of the things we're trying to put up to make more tools accessible is this website related to the book called leadingtransformationbook.com. Or I would love it if people picked it up on Amazon and left a review. I would that would be great. The book Leading Transformation is kind of the best site. It's a great question. I do need to do better at broadcasting what I do. So I do have a series that was on Forbes called The New Entrepreneur. That was on Inc. It was The New Entrepreneur. And then I write for Forbes and I write for Harvard. But probably leadingtransformationbook.com is a good place to start. There's some fun surprises there. I'll tell you about them.
Excellent. Now, as we wind down here, I've got a final question for you, because I think your answer is going to be different than any of the other 500 answers I've received from all the other entrepreneurs we've interviewed, because we've not had one like you yet. So this is good. There's someone who's been listening this entire time, and, maybe they've gained that level of faith that they need to actually take that next step. And they're like, you know what, Nathan, I can do this. I can make my business happen. And they now are ready to take that leap. They are standing, Nathan, in front of the superhero outfit store. They're ready to pick out their cape and tights. But here's the problem. Like I know, that when we reach these moments of decision, we often are accompanied with a companion that is usually coming in the form of a voice. And it's a voice that reminds us of how it didn't work last time. And, oh my God, are you absolutely crazy? I mean, you can't even do your bookkeeping. How on earth are you going to do your own new business? How are you going to make that 6-figure, 7-figure thing happen? Don't you know technology is going to totally crush you? Amazon's going to buy that idea and you're going to be out of business. I mean, it reminds us of all the reasons why it won't work. And for some people, they're related to that voice. So with that being the case, today is going to be different, Nathan. This time they're going to actually follow through. They're going to do exactly what you say. And they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours. What would you suggest that they do?
So this is the heart of the book, Leading Transformation. It's about how do I make change at my company or personal change? And really all we did there was to take seriously the last few decades of psychology about the very human barriers to making change. And there's a lot of them out there, but we could probably bucket it into 3 categories. There's the tendency to get stuck in the status quo. There's the tendency to get stuck in our habits and routines. And then there's the fear of the unknown. And that's what I heard you talking about, that voice in your head of like, oh my gosh, this isn't going to work. So how do we overcome those things? And what we do in the book is we just try to talk about some tools to do that. And some of the tools are new and some of them are old. In fact, the most powerful and oldest tool is story. And story is something we've had as human beings from the very beginning. When we hear stories, our brains actually release endorphins. When you tell a story to somebody, your brain, when we use like neuroscience, and one of my co-authors is an applied neuroscientist, and you actually start to peek inside people's brains, your brains of the listener and the teller start to sync up together and start to become convinced. And so really at the heart of it, what we're talking about is story has this incredible power to change the way we see the world, to suspend our disbelief. And so of the many tools we talk about there, the one thing I would encourage you as an individual or a business to ask the question, what else is possible for my future? And what's a story but with characters and conflict and resolution that I could tell that would help me believe in that? So like when I do this, let's say, for example, with individuals, I'll have them like sit down and say, like, I want you to imagine 10 different possible futures for yourself 5 years from now. And as you write out those futures in bullet form or a paragraph form, like, what do you notice about those futures? What would you ideally like to be doing in 5 years? What would you hate to be doing in 5 years? I do the same thing for companies, myself and my co-authors. So one of my co-authors, Kyle Nell, was the former head of innovation at Lowe's, and he helped take that company from just doing, do-it-yourself retail every day to literally having robots in stores, putting the first store in space, exosuits, crazy stuff. All of the technology, fancy stuff doesn't matter. What they're really trying to do is help people remodel, envision what their home could be and do it. That's what it is underneath. And in that case, we did the same thing where we helped them try to envision what was possible. In that case, what we did is we actually had a panel of science fiction writers, and we had those science fiction writers craft stories about what the future could look like in 5 years. And then we encapsulated that story into a narrative with characters, conflict, and resolution. And we actually told that story as a comic book. So we literally, my co-author handed out comic books to the CEO of Lowe's. And we've done it other places. We've done it at Pepsi. We've done it a lot of other places. The CEO of Lowe's, who is an accountant by training, so not exactly like, the kind of you picture to be like, having a big collection of graphic novels at home. But what it did is it helped them, the story helped them believe what was possible. So again, I'm talking about science fiction writers and comic books and all that, but what all we're really talking about at the end of the day is, how do I overcome the barriers to see what else I could do? What else is possible for me personally or as a business? How do I start to ask the question about what could be? And then how do I tell a story that motivates? And a story that motivates has a character. If you're a business, the character is probably the customer. It has a conflict, which is the problem they're trying to solve. And it has a resolution, which is you as a company, or you as the technology you could bring to bear on it, or the solution you could bring to bear on it that resolves that customer's problem. But the customer's the hero. By contrast, if you're talking about for yourself as an individual, you're the character. And what's the conflict you have in your life? And then you tell that story. And I've personally done this. My co-authors and I, we love to, one of our things is we'll create a Christmas card for the next year. What do we want to have done a year from now? And then we go and map back, what specific concrete steps would I need to be taking today to get to that future tomorrow? Now, let me add the caveat. You're not going to snap your fingers and everything will have changed tomorrow. But if you change your trajectory 2%, 3%, that adds up to a big change over time. And so we all crave big T transformation. Hey, I woke up, I opened my curtains, and a whole new world was out there the next morning. In reality, little T transformations add up to big T transformations. And so I guess that's we talk about other stuff in the book, using artifact trails to map out how you're going to get there, how to create measures that you're succeeding so that you feel some confidence that you're going the right direction. You can convince your skeptics. And we talk about, how to get through if you have a real thorny decision maker in your way. How do you kind of navigate that? But at the core, it all begins with finding that vision of what's possible for you, for your business, and then creating a real story, a real narrative, we call it strategic narrative, around that to get going.
Got it. Totally understood. So like I said, not many people make me want to go hey, maybe I can go back. I have a PhD. It's a public high school diploma. I have not decided to go back in any further, but listening to you, I'm like, why weren't more educators like you? Because that would have been intriguing. That would have been awesome. That would have been a better environment for sure. I definitely appreciate the amount of depth and passion you bring to the subject, and just taking the time to share your knowledge, your wisdom, and your insight here with us today at the Cashflow Diary.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And you've got to do what you're called to do, and there's other paths for everyone. And for for me, I felt like educator was one of them. So I appreciate the kind words.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means leadingtransformationbook.com. That's what it means. It means take a measurable step of action towards that future. Yeah, maybe write out a Christmas card for the next year, because that was neat. I'd never heard of that one before, but it makes sense. Because if you've already written it out, you at least are thinking about it, and you have a shot at making those things that you're writing actually happen, and you can do so today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you guys today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.